guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I actually have some art related content for you. I actually took the time to sit down and film a speed paint video for you guys. I figured since I'm doing this 15 Days of Lingerie challenge for December that it would be good content for this sort of thing, since they're just standalone illustrations that aren't related to anything, and I can just knock them out in one go whenever I have the time. So I figured I would just talk a bit about my process and how I go about making an illustration over the course of this video. I'm probably not going to talk for all 18.5 minutes because that just feels like drawing out my chatter unnecessarily. So I'm just going to pop in here and there in between all the music and stuff to explain more or less what I'm doing. So for this drawing in particular, I'm drawing one of my OCs, Sabine. She doesn't have any particular story tied to her. She's more or less used for this kind of stuff, just, you know, art challenges and random illustrations and things like that. So I thought she'd be perfect for this theme, since the first day of the challenge is flowers and she's got a very pink pastel color scheme. So I thought that would work well, so that's why I chose her for this challenge. Oh, and I do want to state beforehand that all the characters that I'm drawing for the 15 Days of Lingerie are over the age of 18, just so that's out there. So I usually start out with a rough sketch where I just use to map out the pose and proportions and everything like that. And then I go in and I do a more refined sketch depending on how detailed I want the final piece to be. In this case, you saw I did 2 layers of sketches because I really wanted to have the a good base for the line art. Yeah, now I'm just going in and doing all the line art. I usually start out with the face. I don't really have any particular reason why. And I did need to pull up a reference of Sabine because it had been such a long time since I last drew her that I couldn't quite remember what she looked like, because she's got some pretty distinct features compared to all the other characters that I draw. So I'm just going in and tracing over the second sketch that I did that was more refined and more polished. And depending on the complexity of the piece, I'll do line art in several layers too. I usually do the body and the clothing as one separate layer, and then I do the hair on a different one, because a lot of the time the characters that I draw have long hair or complex hairstyles that end up, you know, overlapping with their body and their clothing. So I'll do that on a separate layer so I'm not, you know, confusing myself drawing 5,000 lines all on the same layer. It's just easier for me, so that's what I've been doing. Go hear her bell. And right now I'm just going in and drawing out all the flowers. I don't really make super detailed sketches for the flowers since they're just roses, and those are fairly easy for me to draw, so I don't really need to plan those out super well like I did with the rest of the drawing. So in the sketch they're usually just the squiggles in a vaguely circular shape, and then I just go in and draw out all the details like the petals and stuff when I go in and do the line art. And watching this now, I remember how long it actually took to draw all those flowers. I think the original footage, when I started compiling all of it, came out to about 4 hours total of work, and I managed to reduce everything down to 18.5 minutes, so hooray for figuring out how to speed up video clips. You know, I think part of why it takes me so long to do stuff is because I'm so picky and I keep changing my mind while I'm working. In this case though, it was because there was just a lot of stuff that I needed to draw out by hand, like the 5,000 flower petals and all of that stuff. But I'm really happy with how it turned out. It's got a really clean look. I like it. I hope you like it too when you see the finished product. Now see, here you can see that I deviated from the sketch a little bit. I originally had some of her bangs falling over her forehead, like in the reference picture that I've got pulled up on the other side of my iPad screen. But I decided that it would look better if all of her hair was out of her face. So it's just little things like that that I end up changing when I'm actually in the process of drawing something. But sometimes I'll change the same thing over and over and over because I'm just not happy with it, which is part of why it takes me so long to do stuff. Now, another reason is I make a lot of my stuff really, I guess, needlessly detailed. Like you can see with me adding all the details in her hair and stuff like that. And then I'm definitely going to get more into that later on once we move on to coloring, because I go absolutely nuts when it comes to rendering hair. And here you can see I'm using multiple layers for the line art since I'm drawing all these flowers and ribbons on top of her hair. I'm doing that on a separate layer so that I can just move the flowers around as I need to get them in a position that I'm happy with without having to worry about drawing on top of existing lines. I can just go into the layer underneath and erase the stuff underneath the flowers and the ribbons. That's more or less the process that I use for when I'm just normally inking, is just do things on separate layers and then merge them all into one at the very end. And then here I'm adding, I don't know exactly what it's called, I just refer to it as a quote-unquote underpainting. But I've been doing this for a while to fill in the line art, just to make sure that there aren't any, gaps showing when I go in and add in, and when I go in and start adding the colors. I want to say that I don't see a lot of people doing something similar, but they very well might. It might just be that I'm just not seeing it. But I found it really useful, so I've been doing that for more or less the entire time I've been drawing. Definitely the past couple years, it's really helped speed up my process because I'm not trying to go and find, these little crevices in between the line art that I haven't colored because the line art either wasn't complete in one section or the pixels were too close together and the color couldn't get into that area. And then once I have the quote-unquote underpainting down, I move on to coloring. I usually start out with the skin first because that technically goes underneath everything else. So I do the skin and then the eyes and whatever makeup or defining features that a character has. In this case, I did a little bit of makeup and some blush on Sabine. And then I went and pulled up another layer, and then I started doing the hair. And this is part of why I do the skin first, is because the hairline goes on top of the skin. And I don't completely close all the line art for the hairline, so it's easier for me to just do that on a separate layer, then go in and clean it up by hand. Now I'm just going in and filling in all the flowers with a base pink color. The paint bucket tool is my best friend. And then something that I started doing the past couple years was that I started adding depth to my flat colors by adding just some airbrushing of a lighter or darker color. Like that that was shown when I was doing the skin. I added some subtle shading before I went and do the actual shading that I normally do, by just adding in an airbrushing of her skin tone set to a multiply layer. And it's not quite as obvious with her hair because of how light her hair is, but I did the same thing with her hair. When I draw hair, I usually have a base color, and then I go in with a gradient tool and I apply a lighter shade to the top and a darker shade to the bottom. Which I did do here, it's just not super obvious because her hair is super washed out because it's very, very white. And as you saw, I did the same thing with the flowers where I added a lighter color to the center. And I'm doing the same with the leaves as well. And of course, since the drawing is lingerie themed, I wanted to add a lot of lace because in my mind, that's just what I associate with lingerie, is lots of lace. And I think it turned out pretty well. I usually just use the pre-made brushes for that. I don't really draw it out by hand if I'm doing a lot of lace. Every now and then I do, but for the most part I don't. It's just way too time consuming when I'm already pretty slow at producing art because I go overboard with the details. Just whatever makes it easier for me is usually what I do, and that sometimes just means using brushes. And then I'm just going in and adding some highlights to her eyes and to her face and applying a subtle color layer to the line art to give it a bit of a softer look. I've really been moving away from doing just straight black line art lately. I usually add some sort of color of some sort to it, depending on the character. If it's one of my OCs, I usually have a signature color assigned to them, so I'll just do that. And if it's not something like that, then I just do a color that takes a lot of, a color that has a lot of prominence in the drawing. So in this case, I did a really, really subtle pink because the majority of the illustration is going to be pink. And then I'm going in with a, I guess it's like a wine red for the shading, and then I do this on a separate. Okay, so I merge all the flat colors together into one layer, and then I go on a separate layer, and then I start doing all the shading, which is what I'm doing right now. And this is probably the most time-consuming part of my process because I get really into it. Especially like right now with the hair and the flowers, there's just a lot of little details that I end up adding when it comes to the shading. So this easily takes up the most amount of time when it comes to me actually drawing something. I spend a lot more time than I want to on shading. So I'm gonna be trying to find a way to speed it up. I guess it doesn't need to be as detailed as I make it, that would probably help. Although I guess all the detail was kind of unavoidable in this one with all the flowers. So I did that to myself this time around. I shouldn't really complain about that. Just looking at this now, there's some stuff that I kind of wish I had done a bit differently. But overall, I'm still really happy with how it turned out. So it's not like I'm gonna go back and try and fix the stuff that I'm not happy with now, because I still think it looks pretty good. It's just there's some things that I feel like I could have gone about differently. Okay, and then when I have all the shading done 5,000 years later, I go and I just reduce the layer opacity. I usually set it to about 35%, and then I blur it, and then I go in with a blurring tool and I blur out some of the form shadows. And so that's another thing that I've been doing. I've been trying to be more aware of form shadows and cast shadows in my art. So some have a more softer look, some have a harsher look. And then depending on the tone of the drawing, I will go in and change the color of the shading on certain things, usually white. I usually either set it to a light blue or a light pink, depending on the overall tone that I want the drawing to have. In this case, I did a light pink because I want it to be a very warm color drawing. And then I'm just going in and adding all the highlights. So highlighting the petals and obviously the ribbons where the lights are going to hit it. And there is highlighting on her hair as well. It's just not super obvious, I think, because of how light her hair is. You can kind of see it towards the ends, but towards the top of her head, it's not really obvious at all. Alright, and then same thing with the shading layer. I just go in and I blur it out, adding in the definition between the form shadows and the cast shadows. Okay, see, this right here is why it takes me so long to do the hair, because I go in and I differentiate individual strands, and it takes freaking forever. But it looks really good, which is why I still do it. And sometimes, depending on the piece and the color of the character's hair, I will go in with a larger brush and then take all the 3 different colors that I use to render the hair in the beginning, and I'll go in and I'll add, you know, just streaks of darker and lighter color throughout the whole thing to add more definition to it. Which, if I'm being honest, isn't 100% necessary a lot of the time, especially when it comes to my comic art, but I do it anyway because I just like having all that detail in there. And then once all that is done, I go in and I push the colors a little bit by setting an overlay layer with either a dark blue or a dark purple, and then either a yellow or orange, depending again on the tone of the drawing that I want it to have. And I'm just adding in a background, something pretty simple since I want the character to be the focus. And there you have it. The final drawing is complete. Here she is. Hopefully that was interesting. It's been a long time since I made a speed paint, and I think this is the first time that I've talked over one as well. Or did a voiceover, I guess, technically. But hopefully that was entertaining. I'm planning on making more speed paints for these for these pieces as I continue to draw the rest. Once Clip Studio finally implements their time-lapse feature in the new update, it'll be a lot easier for me to record these. So I will see you next time in the next video. If you'd like to see more content, please like and subscribe. I am trying to upload at least twice a month. I'm hoping to have a lot more art-related videos coming out in the future as well, so stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for coming and hanging out, and I will see you next time. Bye!